The iron shackles bit into Cordelia's wrists as she stumbled off the auction block, her new owner's massive hand gripping her shoulder with surprising gentleness. Around them, the crowd of tobacco farmers and merchants dispersed into the humid Tennessee afternoon, their voices fading into disappointed murmurs about the steep price paid for damaged goods. $500 for a woman who can't even speak proper English, someone spat nearby. That mountain fool don't know what. He's bought himself. Cordelia kept her eyes downcast, her dark hair falling like a curtain around her face. She'd learned long ago that invisibility meant survival. But as the giant man beside her began walking toward the edge of town, she risked a glance upward. His weathered face showed no cruelty, no hungry anticipation like the other bidders. Instead, his gray eyes held something she'd never seen directed at her before concern. "Name's Boone Kestrel," he said quietly as they reached a sturdy mountain. "Horse. What do they call you?" She hesitated. In the plantation houses, she'd been called many things, none of them her true name. "Cordelia," she whispered finally. He nodded once and helped her onto the horse behind him. As they began the winding climb into the Appalachian foothills, Cordelia braced herself for what she knew would come. New masters always wanted to establish dominance quickly. But hours passed and Boone simply rode in comfortable silence, occasionally pointing out a hawk circling overhead or warning her of low-hanging branches. The sun was setting when they finally reached his cabin. A sturdy log structure nestled against a cliff face with a view that took Cordelia's breath away. The valley below stretched for miles, painted gold and crimson by the dying light. "You'll take the bed," Boone said, dismounting and helping her down. "I'll sleep by the fire until we can build you proper quarters." Cordelia stared at him. "Sir?" "Name's Boone," he corrected gently. "And you heard right. The bed's yours." Inside the one-room cabin, everything was neat and functional. Handmade furniture, shelves lined with books, and a stone fireplace that filled the space with warmth. Boone busied himself preparing a simple meal while Cordelia stood uncertainly by the door. "Sit," he said, nodding toward a cushioned chair. "You must be hungry." As she slowly lowered herself into the chair, the first real furniture she'd been allowed to use in years, Boone placed a plate of venison stew and fresh bread before her. The kindness in the gesture made her throat tight with unshed tears. "I know what you're thinking," he said, settling into the chair across from her. "But I didn't buy you for what other men would. I bought you because ... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Because I couldn't stand to see another human being treated like livestock." Cordelia's spoon trembled in her hand. "Then what do you want from me?" Boone's weathered face softened. "Nothing you're not willing to give. You're free to leave morning if you choose. I'll even give you supplies for the journey." He met her eyes steadily. "But if you stay, you'll be treated with the respect every person deserves." "That's a promise." For the first time in her 23 years, Cordelia felt something she'd almost forgotten existed. Hope dawn broke over the mountains with a symphony of birdsong, and Cordelia woke to find a clean dress laid out on the chair beside the bed. Through the single window, she could see Boone outside, splitting wood with methodical precision. The steady rhythm of his axe was somehow comforting. When she emerged from the cabin wearing the simple blue dress, the first garment that had ever been given freely to her, Boone looked up with approval. "Fits well enough," he said, setting down his axe. "It belonged to my sister. She'd be pleased to know it's being put to good use." "Your sister?" Cordelia asked, surprised by her own boldness in asking questions. "Lived with me until she married. A preacher down in Knoxville. Left most of her things behind." He gestured toward the cabin. "Said this mountain life wasn't meant for civilized women." The comment stung, and Cordelia's face must have shown it because Boone immediately shook his head. "That's her opinion, not mine." Takes a strong woman to build a life in these mountains. He studied her face carefully. The question is, what kind of life do you want to build? Over the following weeks, Boone proved as good as his word. He never entered her sleeping area without permission, never raised his voice, never demanded anything she wasn't willing to give. Instead, he taught her things: how to identify edible plants, how to preserve meat, how to read the weather and the behavior of animals. "You're quick to learn," he observed one afternoon as she successfully started a fire using flint and steel. Quicker than most. Cordelia felt warmth spread through her chest at the praise. "My grandmother taught me some things before ... She trailed off, old pain surfacing. "Before they took you from your family?" Boone's voice was gentle but steady. She nodded, not trusting her voice. She'd been 12 when the slave catchers had raided their small community of free blacks in the mountains of North Carolina. Her grandmother's dying words echoed in her memory. "Remember who you are, child. Don't let them steal your soul." "They can take everything else," Boone said quietly, as if reading her thoughts, "but they can't take what's inside you. Not unless you let them." That evening, as they sat before the fire sharing a meal of trout and wild onions, Cordelia found herself really looking at the man who'd bought her freedom with his own gold. His hands were scarred from years of hard work, his face lined by weather and hardship, but his eyes held a gentleness that made her chest ache. "Why did you really buy me?" she asked suddenly. Boone was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "My father owned slaves," he said finally. "Watched him break spirits and destroy families like it was nothing more than farming. Swore I'd never be party to such evil." He looked at her directly. "But seeing you on that block, knowing what would happen to you, I couldn't walk away. And now? What happens now? That's up to you. You can leave whenever you choose, or—" He hesitated, and for the first time since she'd met him, he seemed uncertain. "Or you can stay and we'll figure out this life together, as partners." The word hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Cordelia felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Partnership implied equality, mutual respect, things she'd never dared to dream of. "Partners," she repeated softly, tasting the word. Boone nodded. "Partners. In all things." Winter settled over the mountains like a thick woolen blanket, sealing Boone and Cordelia into their small world of shared warmth and quiet companionship. The brutal cold that had once meant death to Cordelia in the plantation quarters now simply meant longer evenings by the fire, learning to read from Boone's collection of books. "Sound it out," he encouraged as she struggled with a particularly difficult passage from a volume of poetry. His patience never wavered, never showed the irritation other men might have displayed. "Shall I compare thee to a some mare's day?" she read slowly, then looked up with wonder. "He's writing about someone he loves, isn't he?" "Shakespeare had a way with words about love," Boone agreed, though something in his voice made her glance at him sharply. He was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Their partnership had grown into something deeper over the months. She now handled all the cooking and preserving of food while he hunted and maintained their supplies. But it was more than division of labor. They'd begun to move together like two parts of the same whole, anticipating each other's needs, sharing silent jokes and meaningful glances. The first time he'd touched her, really touched her, not just helping her down from the horse or handing her something, had been during a November storm when she'd awakened screaming from a nightmare about the auction block. "Easy," he'd whispered, sitting on the edge of the bed and pulling her against his chest. "You're safe. You're home." Home. The word had broken something loose inside her, and she'd sobbed against his shirt while he stroked her hair and murmured reassurances. When she'd finally calmed, she'd expected him to leave, to return to his bedroll by the fire. Instead, he'd asked quietly, "Would you like me to stay?" She'd nodded, and he'd held her through the night, both of them fully clothed, his presence chasing away the demons that had haunted her dreams for so long. Now, on this particular December evening, as snow swirled outside their windows and the fire crackled cheerfully, Cordelia felt something shift between them. Boone was carving a piece of wood into what looked like a small bird, his hands moving with the same gentle precision he applied to everything. "What will you do when spring comes?" she asked, though the question scared her. His hand stilled. "What do you mean?" "The circuit preacher will make his rounds again. People will expect ... double quotes." She fumbled for words. "They'll expect you to make an honest arrangement of this." Boone set down his carving and looked at her directly. "What kind of arrangement would you want, Cordelia?" Her heart pounded. In the firelight, his face was strong and kind, and she realized with startling clarity that somewhere in their quiet partnership, she'd fallen completely in love with this gentle giant of a man. "The kind where I choose," she said finally. "Where it's real, not just legal." He was quiet for so long she wondered if she'd spoken too boldly. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out the wooden bird he'd been carving. It was exquisite. Every feather detailed, wings spread as if in flight. "I made this for you," he said, placing it in her hands, "because you remind me of a bird that's learned to fly again." She looked down at the carving, then up at his weathered face. "Boone, yes, I love you." The words came out in a rush before she could lose her courage. "Not because you bought me, not because you were kind to me, but because of who you are. I love your gentleness and your strength and the way you see the world." His smile lit up his entire face. "And I love you, Cordelia. Have for months now, if I'm being honest." He reached out to cup her face gently. "So when that circuit preacher comes around, what do you say we make it official?" "I say yes," she whispered, and when he leaned down to kiss her, it felt like coming home. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and the distant sound of the circuit preacher's bell echoing through the valley. Cordelia stood at the cabin window, watching Boone walk up the mountain path with the elderly minister, her heart fluttering with nervous excitement. Reverend Micah Thornfield was a weathered man with kind eyes who'd been marrying mountain folk for over 30 years. He'd known Boone since he was a boy and showed no surprise at finding a woman in the cabin, or at the request for a marriage ceremony. "She's a runaway," Boone said quietly as they reached the porch. "Bought her legal at auction, but her heart's been free all along." The preacher studied Cordelia's face as she emerged from the cabin, wearing her best dress, another of Boone's sister's garments, altered to fit her perfectly. "Child, are you entering this marriage of your own free will?" "Yes, sir," Cordelia said firmly. "More free than I've ever been." The ceremony was simple, held on the cabin porch with the vast mountain vista as their cathedral. Boone had fashioned rings from silver coins, and as he slipped the band onto Cordelia's finger, his voice was steady with conviction. "I promise to love you, protect you, and stand beside you as your equal partner in all things," he said. The traditional vows expanded to include words that mattered to them both. When it was her turn, Cordelia's voice grew stronger with each word. "I promise to love you, trust you, and build this life with you as your equal partner for all the days God gives us." "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thornfield said with a smile. When Boone's lips touched hers, Cordelia felt the last chains around her soul finally break and fall away. The preacher stayed for supper, regaling them with news from the valley settlements. But it was his parting words that stayed with Cordelia long after he'd gone. "I've married many couples in these mountains," he'd said, "but I've rarely seen two people more perfectly matched. You'll weather whatever storms come." That night, as her husband gently helped her out of the blue dress, Cordelia felt no fear, only love and anticipation. Boone's touch was reverent, as if she were something precious beyond measure. "Are you certain?" he asked, his hands framing her face. "I've never been more certain of anything," she whispered, and meant it. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate, a claiming that was mutual and complete. Afterward, as they lay entwined in the bed that was now truly theirs, Cordelia traced patterns on Boone's chest and marveled at the turn her life had taken. "What are you thinking?" he asked, his voice drowsy with contentment. "That I used to dream of freedom," she said softly. "But I never dared to dream of happiness. And now?" She smiled up at him. "Now I have both." The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. A well-dressed man on an expensive horse rode up to their cabin, his face grim with purpose. Cordelia recognized the type immediately, a bounty hunter. "You Boone Kestrel?" the man demanded. "I am." Boone stepped protectively in front of Cordelia, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Name's Fletcher Darrow. I'm looking for a runaway slave belongs to the Worthington plantation in Georgia. Woman named Cordelia, about 25, dark hair, brown eyes." His gaze fixed on her with predatory satisfaction. "Looks just like her, matter of fact." Cordelia's blood ran cold, but Boone's voice remained steady. "This is my wife, Mrs. Cordelia Kestrel. Bought her legal at auction in Nashville. Got the papers to prove it." Darrow's smile was unpleasant. Papers can be forged. And even if they can't, Worthington's offering $500 reward, plus expenses. That's more than you paid for her, I'll wager. "She's not for sale," Boone said quietly, but there was steel in his voice. "Not now, not ever." The bounty hunter's hand moved to his gun. "We'll see about that, mountain man." The tension stretched taut as a bowstring as Fletcher Darrow's hand hovered over his pistol. Cordelia could feel her heart pounding against her ribs, but she forced herself to stand straight beside her husband. She would not cower, not anymore. "You seem to be confused about something," Boone said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of danger that made even Darrow pause. "This woman is my legally wedded wife. We were married yesterday by Reverend Thornfield with proper witnesses and documentation. Marriage don't mean nothing if she was stolen property to begin with." Darrow sneered, but his eyes were calculating now, assessing the large mountain man before him. "Stolen?" Boone's laugh was harsh. "I bought her fair and square at a legal auction in Nashville. Got the bill of sale right here." He reached slowly into his jacket and produced a folded document, signed, witnessed, and recorded with the county clerk. Darrow examined the papers, his frown deepening. "This says she was the property of one James Blackthorne, not the Worthingtons." "Because that's who owned me," Cordelia said, finding her voice at last. The lie came smoothly. She'd learned long ago that survival sometimes required creative truths. "The Worthingtons sold me off 2 years ago to pay gambling debts. If they're looking for me, they're looking for someone they got no legal claim to." The bounty hunter's eyes narrowed, but uncertainty flickered across his features. "You got proof of this sale to Blackthorne?" Boone stepped forward, and despite his calm demeanor, there was something predatory in his movement. "You questioning my word or my wife's?" "I'm questioning whether you mountain folk know the law," Darrow shot back, but he was backing toward his horse now. "I know the law plenty well," Boone said quietly. "I know that a man who comes onto another man's property making false accusations and threatening his family might find himself in a world of trouble. I also know that these mountains have a way of making strangers disappear without a trace." The threat was mild, almost conversational, but something in Boone's gray eyes made it absolutely convincing. Darrow swallowed hard and swung up into his saddle. "This ain't over," he said, but the bluster had gone out of him. "Worthington's got connections. He won't give up easy." "Then you tell Worthington that if he wants to pursue this matter, he can. Take it up with the sheriff in Nashville. My wife and I will be happy to present our documentation to any proper legal authority." Boone's hand rested casually on the rifle leaning against the cabin wall. "But if I see you on my land again without a legal warrant, well, like I said, these mountains can be dangerous for strangers." After Darrow rode away, Cordelia sank down onto the porch steps, her legs suddenly weak. Boone sat beside her and pulled her against his side. "He'll be back," she whispered. "Or someone like him will, maybe, but we'll face it together." He tilted, her chin up so she met his eyes. "That story about Blackthorn and the Worthingtons, how much of it was true?" Cordelia took a shaky breath. "The Worthingtons were my last owners, but I wasn't sold, I ran. And there never was any Blackthorn." Boone nodded slowly. "Thought as much. You're a good liar when you need to be. That's a useful skill." "You're not angry?" "Angry?" He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Cordelia, you've been fighting for your life since you were a child. I'd be a fool to expect you to stop using every weapon you have just because you're safe now." Over the following weeks, they prepared for the possibility of more trouble. Boone taught Cordelia to shoot, and she proved to have a steady hand and sharp eye. They cached supplies in several locations around the mountain, and Boone showed her 3 different escape routes that would take her deep into the wilderness where no bounty hunter could follow. "I won't run again," she told him one evening as they practiced her marksmanship. "If they come for me, I'll fight." "And I'll fight beside you," he promised. But sometimes the smartest fight is knowing when to retreat and regroup. It was good advice, because Fletcher Darrow returned exactly 2 weeks later. This time he wasn't alone. He brought 4 other men with him, all armed, all looking like the kind of men who did ugly work for money. Cordelia spotted them first, riding up the mountain trail in the early dawn light. She woke Boone with a gentle shake and pointed toward the window. "Company," she said quietly. Boone was instantly alert, moving to peer through the curtains. 5 of them, all armed. He looked at her steadily. "Your choice, Cordelia. Fight or run?" She looked at their cabin, at the life they'd built together, at the man who'd given her more than freedom. He'd given her dignity, love, and the chance to be truly herself. "We fight," she said firmly. "This is our home." The morning mist clung to the mountainside as Fletcher Darrow and his 4 hired guns approached the cabin. Boone and Cordelia had taken positions inside, she at the front window with his hunting rifle, he at the side window with his shotgun. The advantage of high ground and familiarity with the terrain was theirs. "Kestrel," Darrow called out when they were still 50 yards away. "We got us a legal warrant this time. Come out peaceful and nobody gets hurt. Show me the warrant," Boone shouted back. "And keep your distance while you do it." One of the hired men, a lean fellow with a scar across his cheek, held up a folded paper and took several steps forward. But his other hand remained on his gun, and his eyes were scanning the cabin for weaknesses. "That's close enough," Boone warned. "Drop it on the ground and back away." The scarred man smiled coldly. "Why don't you come get it yourself, mountain man?" "Because I'm not stupid," Boone replied calmly. "And because that paper in your hand looks suspiciously like a playing card from here." Cordelia had to bite back a laugh despite their dangerous situation. Her husband's sharp eyes missed nothing. Darrow's face flushed red. "You calling us liars?" "I'm calling you exactly what you are," Boone said. "Bounty hunters with no legal authority trying to steal another man's wife. Now get off my land before this gets unpleasant." The scarred man made the first move, dropping behind a fallen log and drawing his pistol in one smooth motion. His shot splintered the wood near Boone's window, but Cordelia was already returning fire. Her bullet caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around with a howl of pain. "Nice shot," Boone said approvingly, then turned his attention to 2 men trying to flank them from the right. The boom of his shotgun echoed across the mountainside, sending both men diving for cover. The battle was fierce but brief. Mountain folk learned early how to shoot, and Boone had been hunting these peaks since he was a boy. The bounty hunters were skilled with guns, but they were fighting in unfamiliar territory against opponents who knew every rock and tree. When the smoke cleared, one of Darrow's men was dead, 2 others wounded, and Darrow himself was bleeding from a graze on his scalp. The scarred man was trying to crawl away into the underbrush, leaving a trail of blood behind him. "Next time you want to try this," Boone called out as the survivors limped back toward their horses, "bring a real warrant and a real lawman. Mountain justice tends to be permanent." Cordelia watched them ride away, her hand still steady on the rifle. They'll be back again, probably, but not soon, and not with the same men. Boone moved to her side and pulled her close. "Word will get around about what happened here. Might make others think twice." As they cleaned up the aftermath of the fight, Boone made a decision that surprised them both. "We're going to Nashville," he said that evening as they sat by the fire. "Nashville?" Cordelia looked at him in confusion. "Why?" "Because I'm tired of looking over our shoulders. Time to make this legal in a way that even the worst bounty hunter can't challenge." He took her hands in his large, calloused ones. "I'm going to officially free you, then we're going to remarry with full legal documentation that no one can question. But the papers are forgeries, and we both know it. Good ones, but forgeries all the same." He smiled at her startled expression. "You think I couldn't tell?" "Cordelia, I've been buying and selling in these parts for 20 years. I know what real legal documents look like." "Then why?" "Because I could see in your eyes that you needed to be free, really free. Not just hiding in the mountains, but free under the law." He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "So that's what we're going to do? Make it so legal and proper that even a federal judge couldn't question it." The journey to Nashville took 3 days, but it felt like a pilgrimage to Cordelia. With each mile they traveled away from the mountains, she felt the weight of her past growing lighter. In Nashville, Boone proved as good as his word. Using his own money and calling in favors from men who respected his honesty, he arranged for legal papers of manumission to be drawn up, backdated, and properly filed with the territorial government. "As far as the law is concerned," the clerk told them, "you've been a free woman for 5 years now. These papers are ironclad." They were remarried that same afternoon by a proper judge, with witnesses who signed their names in bold strokes across the marriage certificate. When it was done, Cordelia looked down at her new wedding ring, a proper gold band this time, and felt something settle deep in her soul. "How does it feel to be free?" Boone asked as they prepared to return home. She looked up at him, this man, who had given her everything without asking for anything in return, and smiled. "Like I can finally start living." 5 years later, Cordelia stood on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching her 3-year-old son chase chickens around the yard while her husband taught their eldest daughter how to whittle. The scene was so perfectly ordinary, so beautifully normal, that sometimes she had to pinch herself to believe it was real. "Mama, look!" Little Josiah called out, holding up a handful of wildflowers. "For you." "They're beautiful, sweetheart," she said, accepting the wilted bouquet with the same reverence she would have shown roses. At 6 years old, Josiah had his father's gentle nature and his mother's quick mind, and he'd never known a day of fear in his young life. "Papa says we can go fishing at the creek tomorrow," 9-year-old Miriam announced, looking up from her carving. She was becoming quite skilled with the knife, just like her father. "Will you come with us, Mama?" "Wouldn't miss it," Cordelia replied, settling into the rocking chair Boone had made for her during her first pregnancy. "But only if you promise to bait your own hook this time." Miriam made a face. "Worms are disgusting." "So is going hungry," Boone said mildly, but his eyes twinkled with amusement. "A person who wants to eat fish needs to be willing to deal with worms." The sound of approaching horses made them all look up. Cordelia felt the familiar flutter of anxiety. It had never fully gone away, even after all these years of safety, but it eased when she recognized the riders. Tom Brennan and his wife Lucy were their nearest neighbors, living about 3 miles down the mountain. "Afternoon, folks," Tom called out as he dismounted. "Hope you don't mind the unexpected visit." "Always welcome," Boone replied, sitting down, his carving and walking over to shake Tom's hand. "What brings you up this way?" Lucy slid down from her horse with Tom's help, and Cordelia noticed she was trying to suppress excitement about something. "We've got news," she said, unable to contain herself any longer. "Big news." "Good news, I hope," Cordelia said, rising from her chair. "The best," Tom said, grinning broadly. "Tennessee's going to be a state. Official announcement came through yesterday. We're going to have representation in Congress and everything." Boone whistled low. "That is big news. When?" "Within the year, they say, and that's not all." Lucy looked directly at Cordelia. "They're also saying that any irregularities in documentation from the territorial period will be forgiven and forgotten. Fresh start for everyone." The meaning wasn't lost on any of them. For people like Cordelia, whose freedom had been won through less than perfectly legal means, statehood would bring a complete wiping of the slate. Not that it mattered any more. Their documentation was now ironclad, but the symbolic weight of it was enormous. "A fresh start," Cordelia repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." That evening, after the Brennans had gone home and the children were asleep, Boone and Cordelia sat together on their porch, watching the stars emerge over the valley they'd made their own. "Any regrets?" Boone asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About what?" "About staying. About choosing this life instead of running for the North when you had the chance." Cordelia considered the question seriously. She could have run in those early days, could have made her way to one of the Underground Railroad stations and sought freedom in Pennsylvania or Ohio. Instead, she'd chosen to stay with a man who'd shown her kindness, and that choice had led to a life she never could have imagined. "No regrets," she said firmly. "This mountain, this cabin, our children, this is where I belong. This is home. Even with all the danger, all the uncertainty." "Boone, my love," she said, turning to face him fully. "There's uncertainty everywhere. There's danger everywhere. But there's only one place where there's you and me and the life we've built together." He smiled and pulled her closer. "When you put it that way. Besides," she added with a grin, "someone has to keep you mountain men from getting too full of yourselves. That's important work." His laughter rang out across the valley, warm and rich and free. "Is that what you call what you do? Keeping me humble?" "Among other things," she said, and kissed him soundly as they sat together in the growing darkness, surrounded by the sounds of their mountain-home night birds calling, the distant howl of a wolf, the rustle of wind through pine trees. Cordelia reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. From the auction block to this porch, from property to beloved wife and mother, from survivor to a woman who was truly, completely free. They called her property once, but Boone had seen her as a woman worthy of love and respect. In return, she'd given him her heart, her trust, and a family that filled their home with laughter and joy. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was the life they'd chosen together, and it was more perfect than any dream. "I love you, Mrs. Kestrel," Boone murmured against her hair. "And I love you, Mr. Kestrel," she whispered back, "for all the days God gives us." Above them, the stars shone down on the Tennessee mountains, blessing a love that had grown from Memphis. ashes of injustice into something beautiful, enduring, and completely their own.